We have just seen the ending of this Senate hearing with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane. This is one of the most significant reviews of the ongoing open-ended war with Iran that the president did not seek Congress's authority or approval for. And yet we know he still needs Congress's money, which is, of course, at the end of the day, your money. And that's to continue this. This was Hegseth's first time there in months. He wants the money to pay for this war. It's about $70 billion more. Pentagon is, of course, doing their best. And as many experts and veterans have pointed out, the Pentagon, the military, the people actually carrying out the war do what they are told by the president. That is the system. And yet, on the political side, this war that the president did not get approval for or build support for is now languishing. And you could see that in the hearing. If you've been watching MS Now, you've probably seen some of the exchanges, which included some tough ones with Republicans. We have a budget issue here. It is an urgent budget shortfall, as some have put it. Lines of funding would run out within weeks, the Washington Post reports, and that's from the Iran war. That is just one way to describe the cost. When you get into the human cost, it's already 17 Americans dead, 100 troops injured in the last 2 weeks. These are real people, and I will note, having followed along with the hearing today, that many of the lawmakers in both parties discussed and paid tribute to that human cost, to the people actually fighting this war. If there was agreement on something today, it would be, of course, a tribute to those people, Americans, who are braving the war. But the second thing we saw was some unity on the idea that this is not going well. Republicans traditionally, of course, softer on that, saying it in certain ways, sometimes diplomatically, sometimes almost in the mode of excuses on behalf of Trump. But you didn't hear a lot of voices today saying that there's a clear objective, a clear plan, or a clear exit path. Hegseth also, because he's under oath, had to give up a little more factual transparency than I would say he or other officials in the administration are known for. And so he said straight up something that's pretty unpopular when you think about the high prices, cost of gas, people having to change or cancel summer plans because everything's more expensive right now. He mentioned the war has already run up a tab of $37 billion. Now, here's some of those exchanges today.
What has actually been achieved? We hear a different rationale for this war every few days.
Your fallback to the Biden administration is just a very, very obvious excuse for what I think is probably, as you describe so often, gross negligence.
At what point do you stop asking Americans to foot the bill for a war they don't support?
Well, Senator, I obviously don't agree with your characterization. I think your first strategic mistake was to not consult the American people in Congress and make a clear case for the reasons behind this war.
I think the American people deserve a definition of what it means to win in Iran.
President Trump has, by any objective measure, failed to achieve his goals.
Guys, we need straight answers. We need straight answers.
That last voice, Republican Senator Kennedy, basically all but accusing the Pentagon and the administration of not giving straight answers today, as well as in the lead up to today. If you watch these type of hearings or their excerpts and you're watching the news, so you're probably familiar, you might have noticed that there was a seriousness, a sobriety, even at times a kind of a hard-headed, kind of calm energy, if you want to put it that way, in the room, because this is not some other political thing, even by the lower standards of the MAGA era and some of the people that Trump has put in charge of major operations who still seem like they're making, internet content or trolling or want to make points on social media. This was a serious hearing about a serious topic. And Secretary Hegseth, who is presiding over a very unpopular war and a lot of questions, I will say as an observer, he struck a more serious tone, at least in style, than many other Trump officials. And perhaps they know that this is only going to get worse and look worse if they do anything to minimize what I mentioned, the loss of life, the unpopularity around the country, and what are, frankly, bleak choices ahead. Anyone in this country who might be against the war isn't rooting for demise. They're rooting for this thing to end. But how? We are reading reports that Trump is considering two options now that his ceasefire is basically broken. One, would be a new 10-day ceasefire to just reopen the strait. You'll recall that would be still trying to get back to where we started before he launched this war. Option 2, reportedly, would be a massive joint military campaign with Israel to force Tehran's capitulation. Now, that's Axios' reporting. The Post says U.S. intel believe that strikes are unlikely to move Iran and that it's unlikely to soften its negotiating position because of U.S. military action. Another way to say that is what commanders have said throughout and what Kane mentioned today. The United States has extraordinary bombing capabilities, but it is a matter of strategic reality and modern military history that the United States has never run a bombing campaign or an air war to total victory. That is to say, if you want to take out a major country, you end up having a ground war. That's what we had in Iraq. Very few people think that's where we should go. So option 2, if it is just more and more bombs, according to, again, the current general in charge under the Trump administration, even by his testimony today, that's not going to solve this thing. Now, Republicans are worried about the blowback. Many Republicans say they're now boxed in. The Times reporting the collapse of the ceasefire presents them with a political worst-case scenario months before the midterms. Politico quotes one ex-Republican saying this whole thing has become a persistent dark cloud over the whole GOP. Here's what we were hearing recently on Fox.
The clock is ticking for President Trump to get out of this war before voters head to the polls.
He promised to keep us out of endless wars or unsatisfactory wars, and now he's in one.
It's making a lot of Republicans nervous. It's already, as we know, unpopular.
Unpopular, nervous, bracing for a rout. We began with the substance, the lives lost, the cost, the way this war was launched without congressional authorization, something that after enough time can become a violation of the War Powers Act and other limits on the executive's power. That's the substance. What I'll tell you tonight from observing this hearing, and we're about to bring in our expert guests, is this is one of those times where the substance is also driving the politics. Rare, I know. But the substance, the problems with no exit ramp, the problems with Donald Trump's approach to the war, the lies or mistakes he has made thus far, because he said many things that aren't true about the duration and the exit and the U.S. strategic position. All of those substantive failures are now stoking a political failure for the Republican Party that may explain the very different tenor we saw in this relatively tough hearing today. I want to bring in Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here at MS Now, president and founder of the National Action Network, and New York Times contributing writer and MS Now analyst Molly Jong-Fast. Welcome to both of you. Rev, I mentioned that because we got a lot of news viewers who follow stuff closely, and they're used to some, frankly, clownish hearings. This one was pretty serious. It had Republicans also asking some, at least, medium tough questions. What does that tell us about where we're headed?
It tells us that I think that the Republicans all the way up to the White House realizes they're in more serious trouble than they thought, and that the performative kind of glib way of dancing through a hearing was not on the table today at all, which shows they feel the vulnerability. I mean, when you are now back with rising gas prices again and other things, they can't play with this. Their constituents are talking to them. Their candidates in midterms are talking to them. When you have a Senator Kennedy from Louisiana implying that they're not telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God, then they know this is no time to clown. You're going to have to really try to appear serious. The problem is that the serious stuff is damaging. No matter how they try and verbalize it or go around it, the facts are the facts, and the facts speak very ill of them that had no strategy in the first place, and that I really think people forget Trump came in this war when he saw the Iranian people marching and he thought the government was going to topple and they'd ride in and help push them over the cliff. The people already brought them there. It didn't happen. They killed the supreme leader. They went through all of that. It did not destabilize them. They totally underestimated and had bad intel on who they were fighting. And now they don't know what to do.
Yeah. And the questioning from, say, Kennedy out to Democrat Murray, Molly, was don't tell us the war is won or Iran is boxed in completely when we can see them projecting strength. I mean, it just becomes, and it has echoes of Vietnam or other times where governments, Vietnam, you had both parties over a time involved in lying to the country about that, Democrats and Republicans. Here it happens to be one party, it happens to be the Trump Republican White House doing it. But don't tell us that they're decimated and cowering when look at how they can project force. This was an exchange here I want to play with Senator Murray. Take a look.
On April 8th, you said, and I quote, their missile program is functionally destroyed, launchers, production facilities, and existing stockpiles depleted and decimated and almost completely ineffective. Mr. Secretary, Iran has been firing at U.S. military bases in the region and its ships for the last week. How is it possible, if their capabilities were, quote, functionally destroyed 3 months earlier, as she claimed, for them to be doing this now?
Senator, Iran is at the weakest point militarily it has ever been in the past decade.
I mean, that's the problem is with having a Secretary of War who's also a weekend cable news anchor, is that he talks a lot. And what these Democrats did, which I think was effective, was that they brought up things he had said previously and then the contradictions that had happened since then. And there's so much public record of him saying one thing and then another. And even Trump, too.